They say the winners write history, and if you were to believe WWE, then WCW was the Death Star and Eric Bischoff was Darth Vader. That's not true, and for at least 84 weeks in 1997 and 1998, it was the better product according to the ratings. And as crazy and at times nonsensical as it was, I would say even what came in 1999 and 2000 was more entertaining than what WWE produces now on a regular basis. In this list, I'll tell you 10 ways WCW beat WWE at the time. In all of the 10 categories I'm going to tell you about, WCW did it better, at least until WWE caught up and started copying them. You can't say Eric Bischoff didn't have balls when he was running WCW. He arrived in WCW and poached Hulk Hogan, WWE's icon and superhero of the 80s, from the get-go, signalling his intentions to compete direct with WWE. While Hogan had been in and out of WWE during the early 90s as he tried to conquer Hollywood, it was still a massive deal for him to jump to WCW at the time, and a move many did not see coming. Bischoff went on to buy up many established WWE superstars over time, including Lex Luger and Randy Savage with big money contracts, something that rocked WWE to the core. Ted Turner gave Bischoff a primetime slot on TNT directly against Raw, and Nitro was born. That was a roll of the dice that could have quickly sunk WCW's chances of competing directly against the industry giant, but using WWE's former star power against themselves, Bischoff managed to make it work, eventually thrashing Raw in the ratings for 83 consecutive weeks. Once Nitro was established, WCW got in WWE's face again by throwing their women's championship in the bin on TV and giving away the results to taped episodes of Raw. I can't remember a time where WWE squared up to WCW the same way, apart from the time that DX tried to invade WCW, but that was mostly a failure and they couldn't even get into the building. And then there was the NWO, who were presented as invaders from WWE, which was an absolute stroke of genius. Even looking at today's product, direct competition never seems to be WWE's strong suit, despite what they might tell you. AEW still beats NXT in the ratings most Wednesdays, and Raw and SmackDown ratings are at their lowest ever, so they can't compete against wrestling and they can't compete against the mainstream either. One of the causes of WCW's downfall was the lack of new main event superstars being generated and a reliance on already established wrestlers who were starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. But between 1996 and early 1999, WCW's main event roster was stacked to the max and blew WWE's main events scene out of the water. Hogan, Sting, Savage, Ric Flair, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, Nash and Scott Hall. While WCW was presenting the industry's biggest superstars competing in the NWO vs WCW feud, WWE wanted you to buy Savio Vega, Ahmed Johnson and Psycho Sid as potential main eventers. Even established certified megastar Bret Hart was a bit of a wet towel in comparison to your cool friends over on TNT. Eventually WWE managed to catch up with The Rock and Stone Cold, but let's remember they almost missed the boat with them too. Who can forget Rocky Maivia and the Ringmaster? While WCW was presenting a realistic turf war between two factions using some of the biggest names in wrestling history every Monday night, WWE was trying to convince you that Henry Godwinn vs Triple H in a hog pen match was worthy of your pay-per-view dollars. From the debut of the New World Order onwards, Eric Bischoff was all about keeping it real. The outsiders invading Nitro could really have happened, and guess what? They were using their real names. Almost unheard of in WWE, when even a real name wasn't a real name, so to speak. Never explicitly stating that they were from WWE, Hall and Nash felt like a real-life wrestling war was underfoot. Do you remember when Medusa arrived on Nitro with her WWF Women's title and threw it in the trash live on TV? That's about as real as you can get, and fans seemed to buy it. Kevin Nash picked Rey Mysterio up and long darted him into the side of a production truck outside the arena, causing one fan to call the police. Even after watching the success of WCW with this more realistic presentation, it took WWE years to catch up and break out of their comfort zone. Probably not until the Montreal Screwjob did we see WWE getting involved with believable angles. Yes, I'll admit the NWO should have ended differently rather than having 4 different branches and 30 members. If it was down to me, I'd have done what Bischoff originally wanted and had the NWO win the WCW vs NWO fight and rebrand WCW to NWO Wrestling. But that wasn't possible at the time. All the way from when the Outsiders debuted through to Hogan's heel turn right up until the NWO Wolfpack forming, this faction was red hot. White hot to begin with, and no wrestling company has been able to replicate that success with a faction in the interim. Even here in the UK, where WWE was always the dominant brand even during the Monday Night War, I remember seeing NWO t-shirts everywhere in 1998. Not just the NWO, but people forget that WCW did a pretty good job of keeping the Four Horsemen relevant too, without ruining the legacy they had held since 1985. With the 1995 to 1999 version including respected wrestlers including Brian Pillman, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, all joining Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, now managing the group with Mongo McMichael filling the 4th spot. Okay, Mongo wasn't necessarily a great pick, I'm not sure why he was picked in fact, but these revised versions of the Horsemen were a good way to appeal to both old and new fans at the time. In WWE, DX was basically a copy of the NWO once WWE had finally caught up to what was hot at the time, but they almost felt like a bunch of teenage boys in compared to the real men in the NWO. By 1999, WWE went balls to the wall with factions, again seemingly copying the NWO's depth of roster. Initially there was McMahon's corporate faction, The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness that eventually absorbed the Nation of Domination and the Brood to make one super faction, and then Vince was revealed to be the higher power and in cahoots with The Undertaker all along, leading to the ridiculous corporate ministry faction that had about 30 members in it. WWE has always excelled in pushing individuals in my opinion, just look at the success of The Rock and Austin. And that's probably what they should have stuck to. WCW did a fantastic job of respectfully presenting foreign talent on Nitro and pay-per-view. This ties back into the point about realism. WWE needed every wrestler to have a gimmick, especially when the Monday Night War was kicking off in the mid-90s. And lazily, if a wrestler was foreign, then that was the easiest way to slap a gimmick on them. Until very recently that's been the case, even years after the death of WCW. As much as we all loved or loved to hate William Regal and Tajiri, one was a stereotypical British tea-drinking snob and the other was a stereotypical Japanese mist-spraying sneak, and they made it explicit. Who remembers how many Pearl Harbor jobs Tajiri got in early in his WWE tenure? While WCW was filling its hugely exciting cruiserweight division with Mexican and Japanese superstars like Conan, the likes of Funaki and Dick Togo were waving a Japanese flag and sneak attacking Golga and Kurgan over on Raw. Before I say anything else, this is an area that WWE caught up to and excelled in by miles, especially in recent years. Nobody can touch WWE in terms of slick presentation, either in the wrestling industry or in other sports, but the mid-90s WWE were very different. Raw looked cheap for a very long time. When they started Raw in the Manhattan Center in New York in 1994, the presentation was different from anything we'd ever seen. Apart from major pay-per-views like WrestleMania, weekly WWE TV shows were presented from nondescript, darkly lit arenas. When Raw came along, this intimate environment, packed with 1,000 or so WWE fans, looked really good. But as business started to go into the toilet in 1995, WWE took Raw out of New York and on tour around the Northeast, often emanating from high school gyms and armories, and that's what they looked like. The show was also often taped rather than live. Nitro burst onto the screen in 1995 with a fresh, exciting intro, live from interesting spaces. The first show was at the Mall of America. Even before this, I remember watching WCW as a child, and they were coming live from places like Disney's backlot, and they even had a rotating ring. While WWE continued to save money by having the generic LCD colours entryway for almost every show, WCW had amazing, unique entryways for their pay-per-view shows, Bash at the Beach and Halloween Havoc being the most memorable ones to me. Nitro being live led to an air of can't-miss unpredictability every week, with action often going down even during the breaks. Vince McMahon has gone on record to say that he doesn't respect tag team wrestling. There are understandable reasons for this. If one wrestler is injured, then the entire team is screwed, for example. It can be more difficult to book a tag team feud too, but that doesn't mean tag teams should be neglected. The Steiner brothers spent time in WWE in the mid-90s but floundered. Their feuds against the Quebecers and Money Inc. felt flat and reined in. The Steiners were a super hard-hitting Japanese-style tag team, cutting their teeth in Tokyo in the late 80s before coming back to America. WWE didn't want them wrestling the full-on style seen in Japan or in WCW, in case somebody got legitimately injured. So before long, they were back in their home of WCW, wrestling the full-on style that made them famous in the first place. In my research, I can't see them ever hurting anybody during this time, so maybe WWE should have loosened the brakes on them a little bit. WCW had an excellent tag team in Harlem Heat. Booker T and Stevie Ray were over as one of the hottest tag teams of the time. Individually, their in-ring work left a little bit to be desired, especially Stevie Ray's, but together as a tag team the brothers had chemistry like no other team at the time. WCW was great at seeing what a wrestler was good at and playing into it rather than trying to mould wrestlers into their own predefined shape. For WWE, a successful pro wrestler needs to be able to tick a bunch of boxes before they're worthy. You know, they should be so tall, be able to act, be able to cut a promo, and be able to wrestle in a particular way. Not so in WCW. Goldberg was allowed to just go out and kick ass without having to cut promos. The Cruiserweights were allowed to just go out and put on thrilling matches, even if they couldn't speak a word of English. Would Hogan ever have turned heel if he'd stayed in WWE? Chances are no, based off the way John Cena has been booked over the last 20 years, despite a heel turn being a refreshing character change that would probably breathe life into his gimmick. I've been a wrestling fan since around 1990. I'm 33 now, so I've watched wrestling throughout most of my childhood and all of my adult life. It started with WWE, and in the 90s when the war kicked off, I just wanted to consume as much WCW and ECW as I possibly could, whether that was through begging my uncle to take WCW off the channels we didn't have access to, through to getting my mom to buy me ECW videotapes every month. It's safe to say I've sat through all kinds of wrestling, a lot of it good, a lot of it bad, but I keep coming back. There's just one thing that grinds my gears in wrestling that I can't overlook, and thank goodness for the mute button, because that's the commentary. Bad or irritating commentary is an instant turn off for me. I'd rather watch with no sound at all than sit through the likes of Michael Cole at his worst, rattling off McMahon's propaganda through his headset. January 1999 was the first time I was exposed to ECW. Barely legal 97, purchased with money, kindly received from family members for Christmas, Joey Styles' commentary was a revelation to me. One passionate individual in the booth, transmitting all of the relative information, storyline wise, in a matter that didn't insult my intelligence. And that's the key, I think. I've always felt somewhat insulted by WWE's commentary, spoon feeding me information, usually as subtle as a brick to the face, until JR became a full-time fixture for pay-per-views and Raw, and Vince had left the booth to become Mr. McMahon. The commentary on WWE was atrocious, probably at its worst when it was Vince and Jerry Lawler around 96. WCW, on the other hand, managed to squeeze sometimes 4 men into the commentary booth, and when it was good, it was excellent. The ultimate lineup of Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan and Mike Tenay were my favourite ever team, especially in 1997 and 1998 when they were commentating on action that mostly made sense. Dusty Rhodes did a fantastic job on commentary too around this time, putting across storylines and really making me believe in what was going down in that moment. WWE have never managed to produce a perfect commentary team, and that's probably due to it really being Vince pulling the strings on the headset backstage, and that's not going to change anytime soon. If you want to hear a decent commentary team, then check out AEW Dynamite on TNT every Wednesday. JR, Schiavone and Excalibur are doing a great job. This is a big one, and one of Bischoff's masterstrokes when it came to differentiating the product from WWE and presenting a facet of the product that Vince had never managed to capitalise on. Vince had always looked down on smaller wrestlers, literally, not being able to put his personal opinions to one side for the sake of the product. Kicking off in May 1996, Bischoff saw the value of tent-poling his shows with hot cruiserweight matches at the start of the show to get the crowd rolled up, and finishing shows with huge main event superstars in dream matches. Bischoff also wasn't scared of bringing in foreign talents, as we mentioned earlier, from Japan and Mexico alongside smaller wrestlers from North America, and presenting them as amazing international athletes, no racist gimmicks needed. The WCW Cruiserweight division launched the American careers of the likes of Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Ultimo Dragon, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, Alex Wright, Juventud Guerrera, Billy Kidman and so many others. Rey Mysterio held the title on 8 separate occasions and is responsible for some of the best opening matches in wrestling history. You have to remember that your average American wrestling fan who was born and raised on WWE's big man formula had never seen action quite like this before. In the years since, we've become conditioned to expect high impact, high flying action, even from bigger wrestlers, but back in the mid 90s this was brand new and an exciting wrestling product that put eyes on Nitro every week. So there you go, there's 10 different ways that WCW did things better than WWE, at least initially. What are your thoughts on this? Any other ways you can think of, or do you completely disagree with my list? Let me know down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video then feel free to subscribe. Cheers guys.